Hey there. Tonight, we're stepping into a world you've romanticized without realizing it would have killed you before breakfast. Forget everything you think you know about medieval life, the castles, the banners, the heroic music. This isn't Game of Thrones. This grime of reality. The truth is simple. You, with your soft mattress, your Wi-Fi, and your belief in personal hygiene, would not last a day in medieval times. And that's not an insult. It's just biology. Let's wake you up in that world. Literally, you open your eyes. It's cold, not cool, not brisk, but the kind of cold that seeps through your bones and feels personal. There's no insulation, no glass windows, no central heating. Just a thin wall of timber and mud, a damp blanket stuffed with straw, and the smell of smoke and bodies. The air inside your house is the same as outside, only thicker. You've been sleeping on a sack of reeds. They rustle when you move, and somewhere in the pile, something alive rustles back. It's probably a louse or a flea, but you don't get to complain because everyone sleeps with company. You sit up and immediately hit your head on a low beam. You curse, but quietly. Words have consequences here, and blasphemy can still get you in trouble. The room is dark. There are no curtains to draw, no switches to flip. Light means fire, and fire costs fuel. So you grope around for a candle stub, animal tallow, not wax, and strike flint until it flickers to life. The smell hits you immediately. Fat and smoke and something faintly rancid. It's not comforting. It's just visible. Now you can see the rest of your home. There's one room, maybe two if you're lucky. The walls sweat moisture. The floor is packed earth, sometimes with straw thrown down to soak up the damp. The same straw you'll have to burn later, because it also soaks up everything else. Your family's in here too. Privacy is a concept no one's invented yet. Your spouse, your children, maybe your parents, all of you living, breathing, coughing in the same small space. The baby's been crying since before dawn. The dog's been licking something suspicious. And the smell? That's not something you'll get used to. You'll just stop noticing it. You get dressed. Your clothes are wool, rough, heavy, and slightly damp from the night air. They don't have buttons because buttons are for the rich. You pull on a belt of leather stiff with age and mud, and maybe, if you're lucky, shoes. Not boots, not sneakers, shoes made of worn leather and hope. You step outside, and the cold greets you like an insult. The air smells of smoke, dung, and damp earth. It's not disgusting. It's normal. Every house in the village leaks the same smells. There's no birdsong, not really. Just the sound of pigs rooting around and someone coughing hard enough to sound permanent. The sun isn't up yet. It doesn't matter. Your day starts when the church bell says so, and it's already tolling in the distance. Deep, hollow, and patient. You'd think it's calling you to prayer. It's actually calling you to work. Your breakfast is simple, and by simple, I mean it barely qualifies as food. Yesterday's bread, if it hasn't molded. Maybe some broth, thin and gray. If you're wealthier, you might get ale, yes, for breakfast because water isn't safe. It's full of whatever the nearest field or animal decided to give back to the earth. You take a sip of ale. It's sour, warm, and slightly thick. Congratulations, you've just joined the medieval hydration plan. There's no toothpaste, no coffee, no bathroom unless you count the bucket in the corner that everyone shares. The bucket, by the way, gets emptied in the street, eventually, and that street is not cobbled. It's mud, deep, sticky, and filled with the runoff of daily life. You'll step in things you can't name. Some of them will follow you home. You head to work because there's no alternative. If you're a peasant, that means the fields. You don't own them, of course. The land belongs to your lord. You just maintain it for the privilege of staying alive. You'll spend the next 12 to 14 hours digging, planting, or harvesting, depending on the season. There's no weekend, no overtime, no mental health day. Your mind isn't something anyone cares about. If you're a craftsman or laborer, you'll shuffle into a workshop that's little more than a shed, filled with smoke, noise, and other people trying not to die of boredom before they die of infection. If you're a woman, your work begins before dawn and ends when everyone else is asleep. Cooking, cleaning, tending, nursing. Your hours are as endless as your patience. You're expected to produce children, not complaints. And if you're noble, you'd think you're safe. You're not. Your bed might be softer, but it's still shared with lice. Your meals are fancier, but you don't understand nutrition. Your water smells faintly of silver and superstition. You might not work the fields, but your life is one long performance of obligation, etiquette, alliances, feasts, prayers. And if you get an infection, you'll die slower, but you'll still die. Speaking of dying, disease doesn't discriminate. Everyone here is a potential feast for it. Smallpox, dysentery, pneumonia, take your pick. A small cut on your hand could be your obituary. There are no doctors, only leeches. They believe your health depends on the balance of your body's fluids: blood, phlegm, bile, and melancholy. If you're sick, they'll drain your blood until you feel lighter. You will, because you'll be fainting. You can't even blame them. They don't know better. No one does. The last good medical idea anyone had was washing wounds with wine, and they forgot that centuries ago. By mid-morning, your stomach is already growling, but food is for later. You keep working. The sun finally rises, weak and white. You sweat in the cold air, swing a hoe, and glance occasionally toward the church, where the bell rings again to mark the hours you don't own. And as you wipe your brow, you might start to realize something that every medieval peasant already knows. Survival isn't about strength or faith or cleverness. It's about routine. You don't live for anything, you live through everything. It's not romantic. It's just relentless. Still, there's a strange beauty in it. The simplicity, the way every hour has its place. The rhythm of bells and breath and sun. It's brutal, yes, but it's also honest. Life doesn't pretend to be anything else. And as the day stretches on, you'll learn that comfort isn't just rare. It's suspicious. In the medieval world, if you're too warm, too clean, too full, or too happy, it usually means you're about to lose something. So enjoy the moment. You've survived the first few hours. Barely. Now let's see if you can make it to noon. Because in the Middle Ages, the hardest part of the day wasn't waking up. It was staying alive long enough to notice. The sun is finally up, but don't get comfortable. Medieval daylight doesn't mean safety. It just means visibility. You can see the problems now instead of tripping over them in the dark. By now, you've been awake for 6 or 7 hours, which is impressive in a world that measures life expectancy like a bad joke. The morning's frost has melted into mud. The air smells faintly of manure and smoke, and your stomach feels like it's gnawing on itself. But food isn't a right here. It's an event. If you're a peasant, you eat when the work allows it, not when you're hungry. You carry with you a small piece of hard bread, maybe a hunk of cheese that's more mold than milk. You dip it in ale or water that looks like something the Thames coughed up and call it a meal. It's enough to keep you upright, not enough to make you full. Your hands are raw by now. The soil is heavy with moisture, the wooden handle of your tool slick with sweat. You can feel the splinters even through your calluses. You look around, everyone's doing the same thing. Old men stoop double, children carrying buckets, women hauling baskets of turnips and potatoes. Nobody's smiling. Not because they're miserable, though they are, but because smiling is a luxury. Energy, after all, is rationed too. If you're lucky enough to live near a monastery or on a large manor, you might hear the distant sound of bells again. They're marking sext, the noon prayer. For the monks, it's time to stop and thank God. For you, it's a reminder that there's still half a day left. The monks, cloistered behind thick stone walls, are living a very different version of the same world. Inside, everything is structured: bells, chants, silence, prayer. They rise in darkness, eat in quiet, and measure the hours not by sunlight, but by devotion. You might envy them, imagining their calm, their warmth. But don't. They're cold, hungry, and tired too, just in a different rhythm. They eat 2 meals a day. They bathe once a month if they're lucky. They sleep sitting up to avoid temptation. And when they're not praying, they're working, copying manuscripts, tending gardens, brewing ale. Their entire existence revolves around the idea that suffering purifies the soul. You, however, don't have the luxury of philosophy. You just have a backache. Around noon, you pause to drink. The water's lukewarm, the color of dust. You sip it anyway, and your teeth ache from the cold. There's no flask or thermos. You drink from whatever container you can find, often the same one your animals use. Germ theory is centuries away, so when you fall sick later, you'll blame the wind or God or bad luck, but never the bucket. You wipe your mouth, stretch your spine, and look at the sky. It's gray, of course. The sun's trying its best, but the clouds here are professional mood killers. Somewhere, a crow caused an omen, probably, because everything in this world is an omen. Superstition fills the gaps where knowledge hasn't arrived yet. A black cat crossing your path might make you mutter a prayer. A sneeze could mean the devil's sniffing at your soul. You carry charms against bad luck, whisper blessings before drinking, and never, ever speak ill of the church, because here, faith isn't optional. It's oxygen. You pray for rain, and when it floods, you pray for it to stop. You pray for food, then feel guilty when your neighbor starves. The church doesn't just guide your soul. It dictates your calendar, your marriage, your taxes, your understanding of everything from illness to astronomy. And yet, it's the only constant in your life. The priest in your village might be uneducated, corrupt, or drunk, but he's still the closest thing you have to hope. When you fall sick, you go to him before the healer. When you lose a child, you bury them under his blessing. You might grumble about him behind closed doors, but you never question his authority. Not openly. The world outside religion is too unpredictable to face without a system. Back in the fields, work continues. You use tools that haven't changed in centuries: hoes, plows, scythes, all powered by your own muscles. Oxen plod beside you, chewing and snorting. You whisper to them sometimes, not because they understand, but because they're better company than silence. The Lord's steward rides by on horseback, his cloak clean, his boots polished. You nod respectfully. He doesn't nod back. He doesn't have to. You're part of the landscape, no different from the mud or the fence post. In his saddlebags, he carries papers, perhaps a ledger listing the names of tenants who've fallen behind on their dues. Yours might be among them. If the harvest fails this year, you'll owe grain you don't have. Debt in this world isn't numbers, it's survival. And debt, like hunger, is inherited. If you're a woman, your burdens are quieter but no lighter. You might be in the fields too, or back in the cottage nursing a child, kneading bread or spinning wool. Your hands are never still. The men labor outside, but you manage the small, endless tasks that keep a household from collapsing. Feeding, mending, cleaning. You also pray more than anyone because you've seen more loss. Childbirth is a battlefield, and you've watched friends disappear into it. There are no doctors, no medicine, no anesthesia, only faith and a few herbs if you're lucky. So you pray. Everyone prays. But prayer doesn't stop time, and noon drifts into afternoon. The sun creeps lower, though you hardly notice. You're too busy working because stopping isn't an option. The day feels both eternal and fleeting, an endless rhythm of repetition that somehow still runs out too fast. If you could look at yourself from above, a tiny figure in a field of green, you'd see the truth of medieval life, that people here don't live for the future. They live inside the present because it's all they have. The future belongs to God, and God's been in a mood lately. As the afternoon light starts to fade, your back aches, your stomach growls again, and the thought of sleep feels like a myth. But you keep going because stopping too early can look like laziness, and laziness in a place like this is indistinguishable from sin. By the time the bell rings for Vespers, your body is a map of small pains. But you've survived another half day, which already puts you ahead of the odds. Don't celebrate yet, though. The medieval night is waiting for you, and unlike the day, it doesn't pretend to be kind. The sun is finally starting to slide toward the horizon. Though sunset, in medieval terms, isn't a spectacle of color and warmth. It's a warning. The light is leaving, and when the light leaves, everything that hides in the dark begins to move. The workday doesn't end with the sunset. Not really. You keep going until you can't see your own hands. The field, the forge, the loom, whatever defines your life, doesn't care about exhaustion. Fatigue is as normal as breathing. You've stopped feeling your feet hours ago, and your back hums like a bad song that never ends. The church bell tolls again. It's the sound that rules everything. The divider of days, the master of moods. For the monks in their stone towers, it means the start of Vespers, the evening prayer. For you, it means the day is almost done. You straighten, stretch, and let your body remember that it's human. You walk home with others. Nobody talks much. Conversation takes effort, and effort is for work. The road is uneven, churned with mud and ruts. You recognize your neighbors by the way they walk, the stoop of old men, the slow steps of the young carrying buckets, the uneven rhythm of wooden shoes on damp earth. Your home greets you with the smell of smoke and sweat and something cooking or burning. The door creaks open, and the heat from the hearth hits your face. It's not cozy heat. It's the kind that makes you cough a little, thick with soot. The fire smokes because the chimney doesn't work properly, most don't, and the room is filled with a permanent haze. Someone's stirring a pot over the flames. Inside it, a stew bubbles, more broth than substance. There are a few vegetables floating near the surface: turnips, onions, cabbage. If you're lucky, there's a scrap of meat from last week's slaughter. The smell isn't delicious so much as reassuring. It means survival for another day. You sit on a wooden bench or a stool. Tables are rare. Chairs are luxuries. You eat from a shared bowl with your hands or a wooden spoon darkened by years of use. No one cares about germs. They don't even have the word yet. The closest concept is miasma, bad air that carries sickness. Everyone eats in silence. You can hear the faint crack of the fire, the occasional cough, the sound of wind pushing at the walls. There's no dinner conversation, no laughter, no storytelling yet. That comes later, after hunger is muted and the body's demands are quieted. You finish your meal quickly. You're still hungry, but you stop eating anyway. There's not enough to go around, and tomorrow will be worse. There's always a tomorrow to worry about. If you have livestock, you go outside one last time to check them. The barn is dark, the animals restless. You tie things down, check the fences, murmur something that sounds like prayer but isn't quite. You know better than to wander far. The world beyond your torchlight belongs to something else. Foxes, wolves, thieves, or worse. Rumor, because the medieval night isn't just physical darkness. It's spiritual. It's where demons walk, witches whisper, and ghosts of the unburied come calling. People believe this not as superstition but as fact. The boundary between the real and the imagined is made of candlelight, and it's always burning low. You return indoors and bolt the door. Not that it would stop much, but it gives the illusion of safety. The fire burns lower, the shadows lengthen. The only other light comes from a candle or two, thick tallow things that hiss and smell like slaughter. Candles are valuable. You don't waste them. You trim the wick carefully, watch the flame steady itself. That little flicker is your sun now. If you're literate, and chances are you're not, you might read by that light. But books are rare, and eyes tire quickly in the dimness. More often, the family just sits. Maybe someone mends a piece of clothing. Maybe someone sharpens a tool. The children whisper stories they heard from travelers. Half-truths mixed with monsters and saints. This is the closest thing to peace you'll get. The hour between labor and sleep. But peace in the Middle Ages is fragile. The fire snaps, and someone crosses themselves automatically. Superstition lives in every gesture. You toss salt over your shoulder if you spill it. You say a small prayer before bed, not for comfort, but as protection. Because you don't know what the night will bring. Outside, the world changes shape. There are no streetlights, no moon bright enough to matter. Villages become shadows of themselves. The sounds you hear, the creak of wood, the howl of wind, the bark of a distant dog, take on new meanings. Every noise could be a thief. Every silence could be a sign. Sleep doesn't come easily. Not because of comfort, it's never been comfortable, but because the human body is wired for fear. The dark has teeth here. It's not just inconvenient, it's dangerous. People die in the night. From sickness, from childbirth, from cold. Entire families can wake up one person smaller without warning. That's why candles burn all night in some homes. Not for light, but for company. A small flame to remind you that you're still alive. As you lie down on your straw bed, you feel everything. The dampness seeping through your blanket, the faint bite of fleas, the ache in your spine. You shift, sigh, try to find a position that doesn't hurt. There isn't one. Someone nearby snores. Another coughs, deep and wet. The sound doesn't stop. It just fades into the rhythm of the room, the symphony of survival. And you think briefly that maybe the worst part of the Middle Ages isn't the hunger or the cold or the fear, how normal it all feels. You'd expect the past to be dramatic, but it's not. The slow, gray, relentless. The people who lived it didn't know they were medieval. They were just alive the same way you are, only with less hope, fewer teeth, and a constant awareness that God or fate was watching with mixed feelings. Eventually, exhaustion wins. Your eyelids fall, your body gives up its protest, and you drift into uneasy sleep. Outside, the wind sighs through the thatch. Somewhere a dog growls. Somewhere else, a church bell tolls midnight. Matins, the night prayer, when monks rise to chant in the dark. While you dream, they're awake, their voices echoing in stone halls, praising a God who seems to prefer silence. And that, perhaps, is the truest sound of the Middle Ages. Not war or plague or screams, but 1,000 low voices in the dark, trying to turn fear into faith. Morning comes quietly, like a thief. You don't wake up rested, you wake up aware. The straw beneath you is damp again. Your clothes smell faintly of smoke and sweat, and there's a thin layer of frost on the inside of the window shutter. You didn't dream, or maybe you did, but whatever it was feels more like memory than imagination. The first sound you hear isn't birdsong. It's coughing. Someone in the next house is hacking deep and wet, the kind of cough that belongs to winter and poverty. It doesn't surprise you. It's as common as rain. Everyone coughs here. Children, farmers, priests. The air is a shared illness. You stretch, trying not to wake the others. A thin sliver of light seeps through the cracks in the wall. The fire's gone out overnight, and the hearth is nothing but gray ash. Someone left a pot of water beside it, but it's frozen over. You break the ice with your knuckle and rub your fingers in the cold water to wash your face. It doesn't help. It just makes you colder. There's no soap, of course. Soap is a luxury, and you are not luxurious. The rich use perfumed oils, the poor use prayer. You wipe your face with a rag that's been washed in the same river you drink from, and call it cleanliness. Hygiene, as you understand it, is a future invention. Your teeth ache, not from sugar, but from grinding grain between them for years. If one hurts badly enough, you'll eventually ask someone to pull it out with pliers heated in the fire. Until then, you chew carefully. Breakfast doesn't exist. You might gnaw on the same piece of bread from yesterday, hard, cold, and gray, or drink a little warm ale if you can afford the grain. People here drink more alcohol than water, not for pleasure but survival. It's the only liquid that won't betray them. Outside, the air smells of smoke, wet earth, and waste. You step into it anyway because staying inside is worse. The streets of the village, or what passes for streets, are narrow, uneven, and layered in mud. If you slip, you'll fall into something unpleasant. If you don't, you'll still smell like it by the end of the day. There's no sanitation. The contents of chamber pots are thrown into the street at dawn, sometimes with a shout of warning, sometimes without. Gardes l'eau, they'll yell in French towns. Watch out for the water, as a polite euphemism for what's about to land on your head. Rats scurry between doorways. Chickens wander freely, pecking at whatever the ground provides. Pigs snort and dig through piles of waste. In some places, they're used as early garbage disposal. It works until it doesn't. You walk past your neighbors, nodding slightly. No one smiles, it's too early for that and too cold. The smell of cooking smoke drifts from some homes, but most people are already at work. The day begins when the church bell says so, not when you feel ready. That's one of the strangest things about this world, the sense that time doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the bells. They ring for prayer, for work, for death, for storms, for fire. They are the voice of the village, the keeper of rhythm. Without them, people would lose the thread of the day. You can tell what time it is by the sound. One deep toll for dawn, another for mid-morning, a cluster for noon. There's no such thing as being late here. You're either obedient to the bell or you're out of step with the world. You head toward the fields again, but something stops you. There's a small crowd near the churchyard, gathered around a body. Death isn't unusual, but it still draws attention. The dead don't lie in the house long. It's too cold, and the smell spreads too fast. The priest stands nearby, his robe dark with dampness. He mutters a Latin prayer while the family watches. You recognize the look on their faces. Not grief exactly, more like resignation. It's the face of people who have learned that loss is a recurring event, not a tragedy. The dead man is wrapped in a shroud, not a coffin. Coffins are for the wealthy. He'll be buried quickly, before the ground freezes too hard to dig. The graveyard is already full. Old bones are often unearthed to make room for new ones. No one minds. The soul, they believe, has already moved on. The body is just a form of clutter. You keep walking. The sight doesn't haunt you. Can't. If you pause to mourn every loss, you'd never finish anything. In the fields, work continues as it always does. The soil is frozen, but there's still labor to be done. Tools to repair, fences to mend, seeds to count. Life here doesn't wait for good weather. It wrestles survival from bad weather. At midday, the bell rings again. You pause, stretch your back, and take a sip from your flask. The ale is sour and flat, but it warms your chest. You share it with a neighbor. No words exchanged, just the slow rhythm of necessity. There's a strange solidarity in all this. Everyone is suffering, but no one is alone. Misery, like everything else in the Middle Ages, is communal. Sometimes, a traveling merchant passes through the village, bringing gossip and goods from distant lands. You listen to him speak of cities, Paris, London, Florence, as if they're other worlds. Places where people wear silk and eat fish from silver plates. Sounds like fantasy. You can't imagine a world where people don't stink or starve. But you've also heard darker stories, of plagues still lingering in the south, of bandits roaming forests, of wars that never seem to end. You nod, pretending you're not afraid. But you are, because every traveler reminds you that the world beyond your village is just as fragile as the one you live in. By afternoon, the wind changes. You smell rain or something worse. You look up and see clouds rolling in, thick and gray. There's no shelter in the fields, no umbrellas, no waterproof coats. You just keep working. The sky has moods, and you're one of its victims. A few drops fall, heavy and cold. You tilt your face up and let them land. It's almost refreshing. Almost. Then it turns to hail. You curse quietly. The crops can't take another beating this year. But there's nothing you can do. The sky doesn't negotiate. You finish your work, soaked and shivering. You trudge home, hoping for warmth, hoping for food, hoping in the smallest way for something that feels like comfort. Inside, the fire's lit again. The smell of stew fills the room. It's thin, but it's enough. You sit, wrap your arms around yourself, and for a brief moment, just a heartbeat, you feel safe. Outside, the rain drums on the roof. The bell tolls once more for evening prayer. The same rhythm, the same sound, the same fragile piece holding everything together. Tomorrow will be the same, and the day after that, and the one after that, until something changes, until the harvest fails, or a fever comes, or a war passes through. You eat slowly, tasting every bite. Not because it's delicious, but because you've learned the first rule of medieval survival. When you have something warm, hold on to it. Because warmth never lasts long here. Not in the air. Not in the body. Not in the world. By now, you've survived another day, and that already makes you exceptional. In the Middle Ages, life wasn't measured in years so much as in accidents avoided. You've dodged frostbite, hunger, and despair. Congratulations. Now comes the next challenge. Not dying from your own body. Illness here isn't an event. It's a lifestyle. Everyone is always a little bit sick. Coughs linger for months. Stomachs ache without reason. And fevers drift through villages like gossip. You don't ask why someone fell ill. You ask when you will. The medieval world has explanations, of course. They're just the wrong ones. If you get sick, people say your humors are unbalanced. The four sacred fluids that make up every human. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. They should be in perfect harmony, like a choir. If they're not, your body starts singing out of tune. The cure? Adjust the composition. That means bleeding, purging, or sometimes prayer. Let's say you wake up with chills and a fever. You go to the local barber surgeon because doctor isn't really a thing yet. He greets you warmly, rolls up his sleeves, and ties a ribbon around your arm. The knife is clean in the sense that he can still see metal beneath the stains. He tells you to stay still, and before you can argue, he opens your vein. Blood spills into a wooden bowl. He watches the color. If it's too dark, he nods wisely and says, "Yes, the bad humors are leaving you. You're dizzy, weak, and somehow colder than before." But he seems pleased with himself. When the bowl is half full, he stops. He offers advice that sounds suspiciously like superstition. Eat less, pray more, and keep your windows closed so the bad air doesn't come in. He sends you home with a charm made of herbs and a lighter head. If you die later, it's not his fault. It's the will of God. That's the beauty of medieval medicine. You can't disprove it because everyone dies anyway. But the people aren't fools. They know pain, and they've built small, desperate ways to fight it. Herbalists, usually women, sometimes widows, keep gardens of plants whose names sound like spells. Wormwood, feverfew, tansy, rue. They boil, crush, and brew remedies passed down by memory. Some work, some don't, and some work only because belief itself is powerful. You visit one of these women. Her hut smells of dried leaves and damp soil. She studies your face, asks where it hurts, and nods as if she's diagnosing your soul. She gives you a paste of honey and vinegar, wrapped in cloth, to place on your chest. You do as you're told. It burns a little, but you feel seen, which might be the closest thing to healing you'll get. The church tolerates these healers, barely. They call them wise women when the cures succeed and witches when they don't. That's the line between medicine and heresy. Whether the patient lives long enough to thank you. Inside monasteries, the monks are also physicians of a sort. Their herb gardens are orderly, their remedies more scientific, at least in theory. They copy old texts from Galen and Aristotle, filled with ideas that haven't aged well but still sound convincing in Latin. They make tonics, poultices, and prayers in equal measure. If you're lucky enough to live near a monastery, you might be treated there. A monk will examine you by candlelight, hold your wrist, and listen to your pulse. He'll look at your tongue, nod solemnly, and whisper something about balance and sin. He'll mix a potion in a clay bowl, bless it, and hand it to you. Tastes like earth and regret. You drink it anyway. You'd drink anything if someone promised it might help. Some illnesses are accepted as punishments from God. Others are blamed on invisible forces, bad stars, angry spirits, or the influence of the moon. Astrologers, who are part scientist and part showman, claim to predict your health by reading the sky. If Mars is in the wrong place, you're in trouble. This isn't ignorance, it's pattern recognition gone poetic. People see the sky shift and the crops fail, and they draw a line between the two. The line might be wrong, but it's at least a way to understand chaos. And chaos is always nearby. Plague, for instance, is the great equalizer. You've heard stories. Entire villages disappearing, carts piled with corpses, priests blessing the air because there are too many dead to bury. It's been generations since the Black Death, but smaller waves still come, silent and invisible. If someone in your family starts coughing blood, the neighbors stop visiting. The priest blesses your house from a distance. The smell of herbs fills the doorway, and you know the end is near. When death comes, it's not dramatic. It's quiet, as if the world is too used to it to make a sound. The body is washed by family members, or sometimes not at all. It's wrapped in cloth, carried to the church, buried before sunset. There's no headstone, no inscription, just a small wooden cross that will rot within a season. Memory isn't carved in stone here. It's carried in stories, until even those fade. The living move on quickly because they have to. Grief is a luxury, and hunger waits for no one. And yet, despite all this, life doesn't stop. Babies are born, couples marry, fields bloom. The world keeps turning with a kind of stubborn optimism. You realize something strange. Medieval people don't think of themselves as miserable. To them, this is just the world, the way it's always been, the way it's supposed to be. They don't dream of comfort because they've never felt it. They dream of endurance. They believe that pain means progress, that suffering brings purity, that every illness is a test, every hardship a lesson. Faith fills the gaps where medicine fails, and somehow it works. They keep living, though you'd struggle. You've been raised in a world that promises control. Pills, hospitals, clean water, the illusion of mastery. In the Middle Ages, control doesn't exist. Only patience does. So you'd learn the same lesson they did. That life isn't guaranteed, and comfort is suspicious. And maybe, after a few weeks of surviving on instinct and prayer, you'd begin to understand what they did, that the real miracle isn't healing. It's endurance. But endurance has limits. And as the sun sets again, you feel another cold creeping in. Not from weather this time, but from inside. Your throat burns. Your hands tremble. You don't want to admit it, but you know what it means. You've caught something. Could be a fever or the flux or something worse. Whatever it is, it's already begun its slow, patient work. You look toward the horizon as the bell tolls for evening prayers. The sound is beautiful. It's also a reminder. You may not last the night. The first sign is the cold. Not outside, inside. It starts in your fingertips, creeping up your arms like frost climbing a window pane. You pull your blanket tighter, but it doesn't help. The shivering comes in waves. You try to ignore it, because here, sickness isn't an emergency. It's an inconvenience. Everyone's sick. But as the day wears on, the ache grows. It sits in your joints, heavy and dull, like a memory you can't shake. Your head throbs. The light from the hearth stings your eyes. Someone offers you water. It tastes faintly of dirt, and you sip it trying to smile. You don't want anyone to notice. In this world, attention can be dangerous. By nightfall, your skin is hot, your pulse quick. The fire feels too close, too bright. You tell yourself it's nothing. A chill, a fever, the usual. You've seen worse. But when you wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, breathing like the air's been stolen from you, you're not getting better. Illness in the Middle Ages isn't private. It's a family event. You don't suffer alone. You suffer publicly. People gather around, whispering prayers and advice. The air fills with the scent of herbs, smoke, and panic. Someone suggests fetching the local healer. You hear the word which murmured once, then twice, then hushed. She arrives anyway, small, bent, hands stained with green from crushed leaves. Her eyes move quickly, searching your face, your pulse, your breath. She lays a hand on your forehead, murmuring something under her breath. You catch fragments. Saints' names, charms, half-remembered Latin. She takes a small pouch from her belt and scatters dried herbs into the fire. The smoke smells sweet at first, then sharp, like medicine and moss. She tells your family to hang a sprig of rosemary above the door to ward off bad spirits. She mixes a drink of honey, vinegar, and wine, pours it between your lips. It burns going down, but the warmth feels almost holy. Sleep, she says. Let the body remember itself. You close your eyes. For a while you drift. Outside, the wind wails. The thatched roof groans. Somewhere in the village, a dog barks and doesn't stop. You think of the church bell, how it marks every hour but never tells you how many you have left. When you wake again, it's dawn. The world feels distant. Your hands tremble when you lift them. The fever hasn't broken. Someone wipes your forehead with a damp cloth. Their touch is gentle, but you can feel their fear. In this time, sickness doesn't just threaten the body. It threatens the soul. The church teaches that illness is punishment or purification. Either way, it's divine business. The priest is summoned. He arrives wrapped in a cloak, his boots caked with mud. He carries a small silver cross and the smell of incense. He sits beside you, murmurs a prayer in Latin, anoints your forehead with oil. His words are soft, rehearsed. He's done this before too many times. You confess your sins or try to. The fever muddles your thoughts. You say what you remember, what you regret, what you think might matter. He listens, nods, forgives. It's strangely comforting, even if you don't believe it. The ritual isn't really for you. It's for the living. The family watches, their faces caught between sorrow and relief. The priest's presence means the sickness has a name now, a spiritual one. Whatever happens next will be God's decision, not yours. He leaves a small charm by your bedside, a token of Saint Roch, protector against plague. You clutch it when the coughing starts again. The sound is rough, wet, painful. Your chest feels tight, as if something's sitting on it. Time loses its edges. You drift between waking and sleep. Sometimes the healer returns, adding new herbs to the fire. Sometimes you hear the priest chanting outside your door. Sometimes you dream of water, cold, clear, unreachable. In your lucid moments, you notice small things. The flicker of the candle, the whisper of a prayer, the way everyone moves quietly, as if afraid of disturbing death. You realize how fragile life feels when it's reduced to breath and warmth. Days pass, or hours. It's impossible to tell. The fever breaks once, briefly, leaving you soaked in sweat and trembling with hope. People smile. They bring you broth, thin, salty, barely food but full of meaning. You drink it. You want to believe. But by night, the chills return. Worse this time. You know what it means. The healer comes one last time. She doesn't bring herbs this time, just a candle. She lights it, sets it by your bedside, and says softly, "For your way." You're not scared anymore, just tired. The world feels heavy and distant, like it's moving without you. You think of strange things. The sound of bells, the taste of bread, the warmth of sunlight on a good day. You think of the way people endure, how they wake, work, eat, pray, sleep, and do it all again, as if it means something. Maybe it does. Maybe meaning is the only medicine that ever worked. Your breathing slows. The candle burns low. Someone holds your hand. You feel it for a moment, then not at all. When the bell rings the next morning, it's for you. The village gathers. They don't cry loudly. They don't wail. Death is too familiar to shock them. They say your name softly, dig your grave in the churchyard, lower you into the ground wrapped in linen. The priest speaks again, the same words he's spoken 100 times before. Dust to dust, ash to ash. The candle beside your bed burns a little longer. Then it dies too. But life doesn't stop. Outside, someone is already feeding the pigs. Someone else is hauling water. The rhythm resumes as it always does. And that's the strangest truth of all. In the medieval world, death isn't the end of time. It's just another part of it. Morning arrives the same way it always does. Cold, damp, gray. But for your family, it feels different. The house smells faintly of wax and smoke. The bed where you lay is empty now, but the imprint of your body remains in the straw. The blanket has been folded neatly, as if the gesture itself might tidy away the grief. No one says much. Grief in the Middle Ages isn't loud. It's routine. Everyone here has lost someone, and mourning is as structured as prayer. There are rules for what to wear, what to say, how long to remember. The first step is preparation. Death has to be made official, not in records, because there are none, but in ritual. The village priest returns, his robe trailing the wet earth, his expression unreadable. He moves like a man whose entire life is repetition. Blessing, burying, blessing again. He sprinkles holy water across the threshold, mutters Latin prayers, and nods to the family to begin the washing. It's not a professional task. It's intimate. The living clean the dead. Your family pours cold water over your skin, wipes away the sweat of fever, arranges your hands. It's not about hygiene, it's about dignity. Even in a world that doesn't have much, people still try to make the end meet. There's no perfume, no soap, just herbs crushed between fingers. Rosemary, sage, lavender, if they can afford it. They press the herbs into your shroud, not to preserve you, but to disguise what happens next. You're wrapped in linen, plain and unadorned. A few coins are placed on your chest, though not to pay Sharon or any mythic ferryman. Here, it's for the gravediggers or the priest. A practical toll for a practical service. The church bell tolls again. It's not a sound of panic or tragedy. It's almost serene. Each strike counts the distance between you and the living. The villagers gather outside your house. There's no funeral procession as you'd imagine it today. No carriages, no flowers, no black silk. Just a handful of people walking slowly through the mud, carrying the wrapped shape of your body on a rough wooden board. They move toward the churchyard. The path is uneven, the air sharp with the smell of wet soil and ash. Someone murmurs a psalm. Someone else coughs. The priest leads, carrying a cross. His voice rises and falls with the rhythm of the Latin chant. Few people understand the words, but they don't need to. The sound itself is the prayer. At the grave, they lower you down with ropes, careful but not sentimental. The hole isn't deep, digging is hard, and the ground is frozen in places. You land softly, wrapped in your linen, surrounded by the smell of earth and incense. The priest throws a handful of soil onto you, dust to dust. Someone else follows, then another. Soon the dirt covers you completely. The shape of you disappears beneath it. The wind picks up, scattering the last wisps of smoke from the incense. That's it. You're gone. But your death doesn't stop the living from needing to eat, work, pray. The world closes over you with the same quiet efficiency that it always has. The bell stops ringing. The sky looks exactly the same. Your family returns home. The fire has gone out again. Someone relights it. Someone else needs bread. There's comfort in habit. It keeps the sorrow from spilling too wide. Grief in the Middle Ages isn't about remembrance. It's about endurance. There's no time for long mourning. The harvest still needs tending. Debts still need paying. Children cry for food whether the world is fair or not. But that doesn't mean people don't feel. They just fold emotion into ritual the same way they fold dough or plow soil. For 9 days, your family will say prayers for your soul. They'll attend Mass, light candles, and hope you find your way to heaven, or at least avoid the long detour through purgatory. They'll wear dark wool, avoid music, and speak your name quietly, like a spell they're afraid of breaking. After a month, they'll start to talk of you less often. After a year, your name will appear in church prayers, said collectively with everyone else who's gone. That's how medieval memory works, not as individual remembrance, but as inclusion in a rhythm. You're not forgotten. You're absorbed. Meanwhile, life in the village continues. The children still play in the mud. The chickens still scatter at every noise. The same bell still tolls for someone else before long. Death here doesn't accumulate. It flows like water through a cracked basin. And though it sounds grim, there's a strange peace in that. Everyone knows their turn will come. Everyone accepts it. It's not resignation. It's faith. Faith that the suffering makes sense, that the order of things holds, that heaven is worth the mud. Even those who doubt still act as if they believe. The church gives shape to chaos. Without it, grief would have no edge, no limit. At night, your family gathers around the fire again. Someone tells a story, not about you, but about saints and miracles, the kind that promise meaning beyond pain. A child falls asleep in a lap. The fire crackles, the smoke curls upward like prayer. In that small, flickering circle of light, the living and the dead aren't so far apart. The same air fills their lungs. The same wind moves across their faces. The candle on the table burns down to its base. Someone pinches the wick between 2 fingers, plunging the room into dark. And somewhere beyond that darkness, beyond the reach of fire and voice, time continues. The earth settles. The bell waits for another hour. That's how death works here, not as an ending, but as an inheritance. The world keeps going, not because it doesn't care, but because it must. Every dawn, someone else wakes, coughs, prays, eats, works. Every night, someone else dreams of a heaven where things make sense. And the rhythm, unbroken, becomes the closest thing this age has to immortality. You've become part of that rhythm now. The candle burns out. The bell rings again. The day begins. The next morning, life in the village resumes as though nothing monumental has happened. Because in truth, it hasn't, not by medieval standards. Death is not interruption. It's punctuation. It dots the rhythm of existence, small pauses in an otherwise endless sentence. So the living rise, again, The floor is still damp. The hearth still smokes. The same cough echoes in the distance. The air smells of ash and livestock. It always does. The children, barefoot and bleary-eyed, are sent outside to fetch water. The well stands at the center of the village, ringed with mud and superstition. People cross themselves before drawing the bucket. They don't know why exactly. They just do. Habit, after all, is the only protection that seems to work. The water comes up brownish, tasting faintly of earth and iron. It is poured into clay pots and left to settle. The sediment sinks. The illusion of cleanliness rises. No one trusts it completely, which is why the family will boil it, or better yet, brew it into ale later. The fields call again. They always do. Even in grief, the soil must be turned. You walk past the churchyard on your way there, and your gaze flicks to the mound of fresh earth that covers yesterday's loss. You don't linger. No one does. The living can't afford too much reverence for the dead. The sun is already high, pale and cold, like a coin rubbed thin. The fields stretch ahead in uneven furrows, dark and waiting. Work begins with no ceremony. You bend, lift, dig, repeat. It's the closest thing to prayer your body knows. Work here isn't just labor. It's identity. It defines worth, belonging, even morality. To be idle is sinful. To rest is risky. So you keep moving, your muscles screaming, your mind emptying itself of thought. Every hour is marked by bells from the church. The monks inside the abbey live by them, too, though their work is quieter. Script and chant instead of plow and scythe. If you could see inside those walls, you'd find another kind of endurance at play. Rows of men in dark robes, bent over parchment, their fingers ink-stained and trembling from cold. They copy words they don't always understand, line by line, hour by hour, preserving wisdom from a world that would otherwise forget. Each letter is an act of devotion, each mistake a small sin. They write not for glory, but to keep knowledge alive. And in doing so, they keep civilization breathing through centuries that would rather choke it. You out in the field don't think of such things. You don't have time to. But the rhythm of their bells gives your work a kind of symmetry. When the monks kneel for prayer, you pause to stretch your back. When they rise to chant, you swing your scythe again. It's an invisible collaboration, the sacred and the mundane, sharing the same hour. Around midday, you stop to eat. It's a humble meal. Bread, cheese, maybe a bit of onion or salted fish if fortune's kind. You sit on a rock, chewing slowly, watching steam rise from your breath. You talk little. Words are wasted when they're not about work or weather. And yet, between mouthfuls, someone might tell a story. Not a grand one. A local tale about a saint who cured a cow, or a ghost that haunts the forest edge, or a miracle that happened 2 villages away. Stories are the only luxury the poor can afford to share. By afternoon, the sky has shifted again. Clouds roll in, gray and full of promises they'll never keep. The wind carries a chill that bites at your ears. You hunch deeper into your wool cloak, grateful for every rough fiber. You think of the coming winter, of the dwindling firewood, the emptying storehouse, the way hunger moves through a village like a quiet rumor. Survival isn't about strength here. It's about anticipation. You hoard, you ration, you plan for disasters that feel inevitable. And somehow, the act of planning becomes its own kind of faith. As the day bleeds into dusk, you head home again, feet caked in mud, hands raw. The smell of cooking greets you before the sight of fire. It's the same stew as always, but tonight it tastes different, richer maybe, or maybe you're just hungrier. Dinner is silence broken by the occasional laugh, the kind that feels borrowed. Someone cracks a joke about the steward tripping over his horse last week. Laughter fills the air like warmth. For a few seconds, the world feels less cruel. When the food is gone, the fire burns lower. Someone picks up a lute or a fiddle or simply starts to hum. Music here isn't performance, it's survival. A soft defiance against the monotony of dirt and death. The melody is simple, looping, half-remembered. Children drift to sleep to it. Adults stare into the fire, lost in thought. Outside, the wind shifts direction. The air smells of rain again. You can hear the church bell in the distance, faint and steady. Another day done. Another set of prayers completed somewhere you'll never see. You sit in the half-dark, eyes heavy, body aching. For a brief, dangerous moment, you let yourself think, there must be more than this. But then you catch yourself. That kind of thinking is trouble. It leads to questions, and questions lead to accusations. Better to stay humble. Better to believe the order of things is divine. Still, as the candle burns lower and your eyes drift shut, you wonder what keeps people going in a world so thinly stretched between suffering and faith. Maybe it's the rhythm itself, the predictable, relentless turning of days. Maybe it's hope, disguised as habit. Or maybe, just maybe, it's love, buried under mud and monotony but still breathing quietly. The love of a child's laughter, of warm bread, of not dying just yet. The monks' bells ring one last time for the night. Their sound fades into the dark like a heartbeat slowing in sleep. You lie down again on the straw. Tomorrow will be the same, and somehow that's what makes it bearable. While the villagers outside chase daylight for survival, another kind of life beats quietly behind stone walls. The monastery, cold, gray, echoing, is the heart of medieval order. If the peasants belong to the land, the monks belong to time. Every hour of their existence is carved clean, defined, predictable. The monastery bell is the real ruler of the Middle Ages. It divides the day into something comprehensible, into sacred portions that make the chaos of the world bearable. You could almost say the monks invented time, not as minutes and seconds, but as ritual. Before dawn, while the world still sleeps and frost holds the ground hostage, the first bell rings. Matins, the night office. The monks rise from straw mattresses without complaint, robes rustling in the cold air. There's no fire in the dormitory, it would be wasteful. They wash in cold water if it's available, or simply bless themselves and whisper a prayer. Their day begins in darkness. It always does. The chapel is dim, lit by a few trembling candles. The air smells of wax, incense, and human breath. The chant begins, a low, steady hum, as ancient as the stones themselves. The words are Latin, sacred, but the meaning doesn't matter. The rhythm does. The repetition is how they survive. The chant fills the chapel like fog, rising and falling in measured waves. There's no melody for joy or grief, no deviation for mood. Emotion is a luxury left outside these walls. The sound is pure discipline, a kind of music that binds the mind into submission. And when the final amen fades, the silence that follows feels enormous. The monks file out, their sandals whispering against the stone floor. They return to their tasks, copying texts, tending the garden, mending the walls, caring for the sick. There's no separation between prayer and labor here. Work is prayer. Every act is sacred if done without complaint. You'd struggle here. You'd last an hour, maybe two. There's no talking, no distraction, no individuality. The rule of Saint Benedict governs everything: what to eat, when to sleep, how to think. You don't own your time, your words, or even your name. You're a vessel, emptied of self and filled with duty. And yet, paradoxically, the monks are the most peaceful people alive. They've achieved what no noble, merchant, or king can: freedom from desire. They own nothing, expect nothing, need nothing. The world outside rages. Wars, famines, plagues, but inside, the candlelight is constant. Still, it's not easy. The routine is designed to wear the body thin and polish the soul sharp. After matins comes lauds, then prime, then terce, each hour marked by bells. Between them, silence and work. The monks copy ancient texts, scriptures, histories, even fragments of philosophy no one else remembers. Their pens scratch softly, line after line, across calfskin parchment. Mistakes are rare and costly. A single blot of ink can ruin a page that took weeks to prepare. Some copyists whisper prayers before each letter, asking God for steady hands. Others insert small doodles in the margins, tiny faces, animals, jokes. It's the closest they ever come to rebellion. The air in the scriptorium is cold and dry. The light comes through narrow slits, more shadow than illumination. Candles burn low, their smoke leaving stains on the walls. Hours pass in silence, broken only by the turning of pages. When the bell rings again, they rise without hesitation. The body obeys before the mind can question. As habit now, ritual fused into bone. The meal bell is the only sound that brings a faint flicker of anticipation. Food is not pleasure, it's function. A bowl of vegetable broth, a crust of bread, perhaps a piece of fish if the day is merciful. Meat is rare, indulgence, forbidden. They eat in silence while one monk reads aloud from scripture. Even nourishment must come second to devotion. Afterward, they return to their work. Some tend to the herb gardens. Rows of rosemary, sage, and comfrey each plant a small act of mercy. Others care for the sick, bathing wounds, mixing tonics, whispering prayers. Their medicine is faith and patience. Their compassion, methodical. There's no ambition here, no rise or fall, just constancy. And yet, in that monotony, something extraordinary happens. They build a world without realizing it. Every word they copy, every seed they plant, every soul they tend becomes the scaffolding of civilization. Long after kings fall and wars are forgotten, their ink will still be legible. Their gardens will still bloom. Their bells will still mark the hours. It's easy to forget that the monks weren't just praying for salvation. They were preserving the memory of humanity. Without them, most of what we know of the ancient world would have vanished. The candlelight of their work outlasted the fire of empires. Outside, life is chaos. Feudal lords fighting over borders, peasants struggling against famine, traders crossing oceans they can't map. But inside the monastery, the rhythm never falters. The hours repeat, the bells ring, the chants rise. It's the heartbeat of a world that would otherwise stop. Still, for all their faith, the monks are human. They feel the same hunger, the same fatigue, the same doubt. Some fall asleep during prayer and wake to shame. Some struggle with silence, their thoughts too loud. Some dream of leaving, of warmth, of wine, of women, and wake trembling with guilt. But they stay, because leaving means facing the chaos again, and here at least everything makes sense. As night falls, the bell rings once more for Compline, the final prayer of the day. The chapel glows faintly, golden light trembling on stone. The monks kneel, whispering the same words they've said every night of their lives. When the prayer ends, the lights are extinguished one by one. The last sound is the echo of sandals retreating down the corridor, fading into stillness. Outside, the wind howls through the cloister arches, carrying the scent of rain and wood smoke. Inside, all is order. And if you listen closely, really listen, you can almost hear it. The sound of time itself breathing, measured not by clocks, but by devotion. That's the secret of their world. In a civilization that measured worth by war and wealth, the monks measured it by endurance, by the ability to keep lighting candles in the dark, 1 hour at a time. They believed that if you could just keep rhythm with the divine, the chaos of life would never touch you. And maybe for a while they were right. The bells were never meant to rule the world. They were meant to call a few sleepy monks to prayer, to remind a handful of devoted men when to kneel and when to eat. But slowly, patiently, their rhythm spilled beyond the monastery walls until everyone, from kings to farmers, lived by their echo. It began with sound. In a world without clocks, without schedules, without any consistent measure of time, sound was structure. A bell could be heard for miles, the one clear signal that pierced the fog, the wind, the daily noise of hammers, plows, and voices. And when you heard it, you knew exactly what you were supposed to be doing. At dawn, the first bell meant rise and pray. By noon, it meant pause and reflect. By sunset, it meant put away your tools, go home, and thank God for surviving another day. No one questioned it. They didn't need to. The bell told them when to live. In cities, the pattern grew more complex. The town's main church rang its own hours, echoing the monastic schedule. Merchants began to use the bells to open and close their stalls. Bakers rose when the monks did, kneading dough by candlelight so bread would be ready for the market at prime. Even thieves listened because crime, too, needed good timing. That's how time became collective. Before the bells, each village had its own rhythm, guided by the sun, the seasons, or the stomach. After the bells, the world began to move together. Slowly, rhythm became order. Order became habit. And habit became civilization. If you lived then, you wouldn't think of this as invention. You'd think of it as obedience. The monks weren't teaching people to measure hours. They were teaching them to submit to them. And yet, in that quiet submission, something remarkable happened. Progress. Because when you can count time, you can coordinate. When you can coordinate, you can build. The monasteries, those islands of silence, became the first centers of productivity. They developed schedules for prayer, work, study, and rest. They divided the day with such precision that their routine made the rest of the world look chaotic by comparison. The nobility noticed. The merchants copied. The peasants adapted. Before long, every serious institution, courts, guilds, markets, borrowed from the monks' clockless clockwork. Of course, not everyone appreciated this new tyranny of sound. Some peasants grumbled that the bells cut the day too short, that the Lord's priest was stealing labor from the light. But the rhythm was relentless. The bells didn't care about comfort. And so, by the 13th century, the sound of time itself had become sacred. Even language changed. People stopped saying when the sun rises or when the dew dries. They began saying at prime, at vespers, at compline. Human life, once fluid, was now a sequence of hours, holy, measurable, inescapable. Then came the invention that made the bells immortal, the clock. Not the tiny, portable thing we know, but the monstrous tower clocks of the late Middle Ages. They were feats of metal and muscle, gears as big as wagon wheels, weights that needed hauling by hand. They didn't tell time so much as announce it, each hour a roar of iron and echo. They stood in city squares, above cathedrals, over market halls. And for the first time, time wasn't just heard, it was seen. The first mechanical clocks didn't have minute hands or faces. They were sound first, sight second. Each toll of the bell marked a kind of public heartbeat. It was beautiful. It was oppressive. It was progress disguised as prayer. The monks had created the world's first schedule. The towns turned it into a system, and slowly that system took control. Farmers began to plan by the bell instead of the sun. Merchants counted profit by the hour. Governments issued laws specifying when markets opened, when curfews fell, when soldiers must march. Even sleep began to change. The human body once drifted naturally. 2 short rests separated by hours of wakeful prayer or conversation in the dark. But as bells tightened the day, Sleep was compressed into one long stretch to make mornings productive. The bell, in a way, rewrote humanity's biology. Inside the monasteries, the monks kept refining the art. Their candle clocks, those slender tapers marked with wax rings that burned at a known pace, became more accurate. Water clocks improved, too, dripping through copper funnels, measured by song. Eventually, the monks of Glastonbury and St. Albans and Chartres began to experiment with gears, weights, and escapements. It was a quiet revolution. They weren't trying to control time. They were trying to honor it. But invention has a way of outgrowing reverence. By the late 14th century, towns competed to have the loudest, most precise clocks. Cities like Milan and Strasbourg turned them into wonders of engineering. The people gathered in squares not to pray, but to watch the automata, the angels and devils that struck the hours, mechanical figures that moved with eerie grace. Time had become spectacle. The same bells that once called the faithful now called the curious. The sacred rhythm had turned into public theater. You could say that's when the world stopped listening for God and started listening for itself. But even then, even in their new mechanical glory, the bells carried the same message. Every toll was a reminder. Life was short, order was fragile, and time belonged to no one. If you lived under those bells, you didn't need a calendar to feel mortality. You heard it every hour. They told you when to wake, when to eat, when to work, when to pray, and eventually when to die. Every ring was both a beginning and an ending. And in that endless repetition, medieval people found comfort. The world might be violent, unpredictable, cruel, but at least it was rhythmic. That's what the bells offered. Not safety, not prosperity, but pattern. And pattern, in a world that understood nothing else, was everything. You can almost imagine it. A small village at dusk, the last bell of the day tolling slow and low, the people pausing where they stand, at the plow, at the market stall, at the hearth. For a moment, no one moves, no one speaks. The sound passes through them like wind through wheat. And then, just as quietly, life begins again. The Middle Ages were full of horrors, but they were also full of rhythm. And if you listen closely, past the myths, the wars, the noise, you can still hear it. The steady pulse of time being born, one bell at a time. There's a saying whispered by monks and peasants alike, ora et labora, pray and work. It sounds simple enough, even peaceful, but in the Middle Ages it wasn't advice. It was law. Life itself was divided between those two verbs. For most people, labor wasn't just an occupation. It was theology. The church taught that work was both punishment and redemption. Adam's curse had condemned humanity to toil, but each swing of a hoe, each stitch, each bead of sweat was also a small step toward salvation. And so, as the bells marked each hour, the rhythm of heaven was carried out with pitchforks and plows. When you woke at dawn, it wasn't to chase profit. The very idea of profit was suspicious, even sinful. You worked because idleness was dangerous. Idle hands were said to invite the devil. And that was terrifying enough to keep you moving. The village, by sunrise, was already alive. Smoke rose from hearths. Doors opened onto mud and sunlight. You'd hear the soft thud of axes splitting wood, the creak of wagons, the cries of livestock. The world began again exactly where it ended yesterday. The air smelled of work. The plowman and his ox started at the edge of the field, the soil wet and dark underfoot. He knew each furrow by feel. The blacksmith's forge roared in the village center, sparks escaping into the gray morning like fireflies that had forgotten joy. The women carried baskets of grain to the mill, talking softly about weather and sickness and saints. Every trade was a conversation between the human body and the stubbornness of nature. And yet, for all its harshness, the work carried a strange rhythm of grace. The repetition soothed. The predictability meant safety. A plow that cuts straight. A rhythm of hammer and anvil that never falters. A loom that hums like a prayer. You didn't have to think. You just had to keep time. And because life was difficult, the smallest breaks in the rhythm felt like blessings. At mid-morning, the bell rang for terce. The monks prayed. The peasants rested. A few minutes of stillness in the open air. Someone passed a piece of bread. Someone else a sip of ale. You wiped your brow, stretched your back, and let the quiet fill you. You wouldn't have called it peace, but it was close enough. By midday, the rhythm resumed. The sun climbed high, its heat softened by haze. The fields shimmered faintly, and the world smelled of iron and earth. Somewhere far off, a church bell echoed again, muffled by distance, reminding everyone that time itself was passing whether they wanted it to or not. The church didn't just sanctify work, it controlled it. There were holy days for feasting, fasts for repentance, and countless saints' days scattered through the calendar like tiny interruptions of grace. In theory, those days were meant for rest. In practice, they were reminders of hierarchy. The church giving and taking time as it pleased. For nobles, work meant administration, collecting rents, managing vassals, planning hunts and alliances. For artisans, it meant precision. For peasants, it meant survival. The tools of the medieval worker were simple, but each one carried weight. A plowshare wasn't just metal, it was inheritance, debt, lifeline. A loom wasn't a machine. It was a domestic cathedral, every thread a quiet act of endurance. And every so often, a new kind of work appeared building. Across Europe, stone rose toward the sky in ways no one had imagined possible. Cathedrals, towers, bridges, each one demanded centuries of labor. Men hauled limestone blocks heavier than belief, carved gargoyles whose faces they'd never see finished. When you worked on a cathedral, you weren't just shaping stone, you were shaping eternity. No one questioned the effort. No one asked about comfort. The concept didn't exist. Pain was ordinary, exhaustion divine. The reward was knowing that something you made might last longer than your body, your children, even your language. Inside those cathedrals, the monks' chants echoed off the high vaults, mingling with the sound of chisels and scaffolds creaking. Time seemed to layer itself, prayer and labor overlapping until you couldn't tell one from the other. For the poor, the reward was smaller. A loaf of bread, a brief harvest before the next famine. But they found meaning where they could, in the smell of newly baked bread, in the warmth of a shared fire, in the laughter that somehow survived exhaustion. Work didn't just build the world, it distracted from it. And that was crucial because medieval life had no safety nets. One bad harvest, one fever, one lord's war, and everything vanished. The rhythm of work was the only stability. Even the monks worked ceaselessly. Their herb gardens, scriptoriums, kitchens, and breweries were part of the same devotion. They didn't separate the sacred from the mundane. Stirring a pot of soup was as holy as transcribing scripture, as long as it was done without complaint. That philosophy seeped outward. The monastery was the model for every functioning system that followed. From guilds to universities to the modern factory, every structured workplace owes its existence to the medieval monastic schedule. The irony is that those same monks who fled the world ended up organizing it. As the sun slid toward afternoon, you could feel fatigue settling in like fog. The world slowed, though it never stopped. Tools clattered, oxen snorted, smoke drifted low and thin. When the bell finally rang for vespers, even the most devout worker sighed with relief. Not because prayer was joyful, but because it meant the body could rest. The evening light fell golden over the fields, catching on puddles and blades of grass. The monastery bell echoed over the hills, and for a fleeting moment, the world seemed balanced. There was no hunger, no plague, no fear, just the hum of existence, perfectly timed. You could almost believe that this rhythm, this weary harmony of labor and faith, was enough to hold the universe together. Maybe it was, but just beyond that peace, something else was forming, something new. The rhythm that once served God was about to serve something far less forgiving. Because the next great age wouldn't measure time with prayer. It would measure it with money. For centuries, the rhythm of life had been holy. The bells, the prayers, the endless repetition, they gave meaning to hardship, turned suffering into devotion. But something shifted as the Middle Ages began to fade into the early dawn of the modern world. The sound of the bells didn't stop. It just began to mean something different. It was no longer a call to prayer. It was a schedule. The merchants were the first to notice. In the growing cities, Florence, Bruges, London, the days started to fill with noise not of chance or horses, but of counting, bartering, striking coins. Trade was transforming everything. The marketplace replaced the monastery as the center of order, and profit replaced salvation as the measure of success. No one announced this change, of course. Crept in quiet as dust. A craftsman, for instance, needed to know how long it took to shape a piece of wood or stitch a cloak. A merchant wanted to know when the ships would dock, when interest would be due. The monks had divided time for the sake of heaven. The merchants divided it for efficiency. It was the same structure, only with the soul stripped out. In a way, the invention of timekeeping was too successful. The monks had taught the world to respect the hour, to submit to rhythm. But once people learned to obey it, they stopped caring who had rung the first bell. The new bells weren't mounted in churches. They were built into city halls, market towers, and banks. Their sound meant opportunity. Their tolls dictated trade routes and contracts. For the first time in history, humanity began to compete with its own hours. The great irony? The men who built those early clocks often came from monastic training. They were engineers of devotion, repurposed by ambition. The same hands that once marked the hours of prayer now carved the cogs that powered commerce. It was progress, yes, but it was also a quiet betrayal. Time, once a gift from God, became a commodity. And that changed everything. In the countryside, peasants still worked by the sun and slept by the dark. But in the cities, the pulse of life accelerated. Workshops and guilds set official hours. Apprentices rose before dawn and worked past dusk. Bells dictated their shifts, but now the sound meant wages, not blessings. People began to speak of wasting time, as if it were something owned. As if the hours could be hoarded or lost. That idea, simple, invisible, was revolutionary. It changed how people thought about themselves. No longer souls moving toward eternity. Now, bodies moving through schedules. Existence was no longer circular. It was linear, measurable, and brutally finite. The church still claimed to own eternity, but the merchants quietly owned the hours in between. And those hours started to multiply. In Italy, bankers used mechanical clocks to time interest rates. In England, factory precursors timed work cycles. The concept of a workday was born, not a span of light and dark, but a fixed pattern of expectation. The monks had meant for time to liberate the soul from chaos. Instead, it enslaved the body to production. There's something haunting about that shift. The same discipline that once drew men closer to the divine was now being used to squeeze value from their hands. The monastery's strictness had created order. The city's greed perfected it. And yet, if you were living through it, you might not notice the difference. You'd still wake to a bell, work by its rhythm, and sleep at its command. Only now, the bell was paid for by the guild instead of the church. The words had changed, but the music was the same. The towns grew rich on this new rhythm. Clothmakers, merchants, and sailors measured everything in hours, production, distance, risk. Time was no longer the frame of existence. It was the engine, and it began to demand something terrible: precision. The old candle clocks, water drips, and shadows weren't enough. The new world wanted accuracy, the kind of time that could be measured, bought, and trusted across continents. So the engineers refined their machines. Clocks became smaller, faster, more exact. They ticked like heartbeats, relentless, inescapable. Once, monks had burned candles to mark the passage of devotion. Now, merchants burned hours to measure profit. In both cases, the result was the same: a flickering light devoured by its own purpose. The people began to notice their fatigue. In the monasteries, the exhaustion had meaning. Spiritual fatigue was a form of purification. But in the city, fatigue was just a problem to solve. Coffee arrived from the Islamic world, and suddenly sleeplessness became a virtue. The modern world was being born, one cup of caffeine and one ticking gear at a time. And though no one realized it, the monk's legacy had reached its final form. The discipline of devotion had become the discipline of productivity. The rhythm of prayer had turned into the rhythm of labor. Even the language of business began to echo the language of faith. Guilds called themselves brotherhoods. Work became calling. Time was sacred again, but this time the god it served was profit. You can almost imagine one of those old monks, stooped, ink-stained, gazing at a gleaming brass clock in some bustling city square, hearing its perfect chime and thinking, "Yes, we made this, and we have no idea what it's become." But that's the quiet tragedy of every invention. It never stays pure. The candle burns, the wax melts, the light moves on. The medieval world was fading now, its rhythms transforming into the pulse of something faster, colder, and infinitely louder. The bells still rang, but no one prayed anymore when they did. They worked. By the 15th century, the human heart had a rival. It wasn't war or sin or plague. It was rhythm itself. The steady, mechanical tick of the new world began to drown out the older pulse of existence, the one tied to the sun, the earth, the seasons, the sigh of wind through wheat. The clock had become more than a machine. It was a philosophy, and everyone was listening. The sound of metal timepieces filled monasteries, palaces, workshops, and even taverns. People had always feared the unknown. Now they feared lateness. The world had learned to worship precision. It wasn't enough to rise with dawn anymore. You had to rise on time. Not soon, not late, but exactly when the bell told you. It was subtle at first, a habit, then a compulsion, then an identity. Medieval life, with all its slow rhythms and deliberate monotony, had been built for endurance. You were supposed to survive it, not master it. But now something was shifting, an impatience that no one could quite name. The monks had measured time to discipline the soul. The merchants measured it to control labor. And by the end of the Middle Ages, time began to measure people. You could see it in the faces of craftsmen who rushed their work, no longer crafting for beauty but for quota. In the merchants who bought and sold hours the way their fathers bought and sold wool. In the servants who feared the sound of the clock more than the voice of their master. Time, once sacred, was becoming currency, and that, more than any war or invention, marked the death of the medieval world. In a small town, pick anyone, it doesn't matter, the bell tower rises above the crooked roofs. The morning mist still hugs the ground, smelling faintly of manure and smoke. The baker has been awake since before dawn, kneading dough in rhythm with the clock's slow, patient strike. His son listens for each note. At the 6th toll, he begins to light the ovens. At the 7th, the bread is ready to rise. He doesn't look at the sky anymore to know the hour. The sky is unreliable. The bell is not. Across the square, a weaver hums as she works, her loom clacking in sync with the same mechanical time. Every thread, every pass of the shuttle, feels like another coin sliding into existence. She used to think of her weaving as an act of devotion, something that tied her to her ancestors. Now it ties her to a contract. She owes her guild 50 lengths of cloth this month. The pattern must be perfect. The hours must be long. And so, for the first time in human history, she works not for survival but for schedule. There's something quietly tragic about it. She doesn't see herself as part of a sacred rhythm anymore. She's part of a system, a gear inside a larger mechanism of profit and production. The monastery's discipline, meant to lift the soul toward God, had trickled down to the masses, stripped of faith but heavy with obligation. The peasants, who once prayed for the harvest, now prayed for time, for more hours in the day. Even the nobles weren't free from this new tyranny. In castles and courts, punctuality became a mark of refinement. To arrive at the third bell for a feast or a meeting signaled power, the ability to master one's hours. Time became etiquette, social armor, proof of worth. Kings demanded timetables for their armies. Princes hired astronomers to calculate not just stars, but minutes. Navigation began to rely on mechanical precision. To cross the sea, you needed time as much as wind. And soon, every pursuit of beauty, art, music, architecture was reshaped by that obsession. Cathedrals were designed with mathematical precision. Painters used geometry to measure perspective. Composers began to write music in bars and measures, breaking eternity into pieces small enough to count. Even God's grandeur had to fit the grid. But outside those walls, life was still cruelly human. Farmers still prayed for rain. Mothers still died in childbirth. Disease still swept through villages with no regard for schedules. Time might have become measurable, but life remained unpredictable. That tension between the measured and the chaotic defined the end of the medieval world. People lived with one foot in faith and the other in mathematics. They built cathedrals with the precision of clockmakers and said their prayers beneath them, unsure which master they were serving. For a while, the two systems coexisted, but the balance was delicate. You can almost picture it. The monastery bells ringing for evening prayer while, not far away, a merchant checks the small, ticking clock in his shop and decides to stay open an hour longer. Both believe they're honoring something higher. One honors God, the other profit. Neither realizes they're part of the same machine. Inside the monastery, things were changing too. The young novices, raised in a world already ruled by clocks, began to question the silence of their elders. They didn't need to rely on candles and shadow to tell the hour anymore. The mechanism did that for them. And somehow, the miracle of it all, the order, the precision, made them feel less faithful, not more. Because if man could control time, what was left for God to do? That thought was dangerous, heretical even, but it whispered its way through cloisters and taverns alike. And so, without meaning to, the monks who had disciplined the soul into obedience had also trained the mind to measure, to analyze, to control. It's ironic, really. The monasteries, which once built walls to keep the world out, had ended up laying the foundations for the Renaissance, the rebirth of reason, curiosity, and eventually rebellion. The same bells that had once called the faithful to prayer would one day call them to revolution. But for now, in this late medieval twilight, the world still moved in rhythm, half sacred, half secular. The hours belonged to both God and gold. You can hear it if you listen. The hum of industry under the chant of prayer, the tick of gears beneath the toll of bells. The monks still kneel. The merchants still count. The peasants still sweat. The light fades, as it always does, and the bell tolls once more. Slow, deliberate, unending. In that sound, all of human history balances for a heartbeat. The holy and the human, the ancient and the modern, the prayer and the price. And though you wouldn't know it then, you're standing on the edge of everything. The medieval world is ending, but its rhythm, its bells, its candles, its endless counting of hours will echo forever. By the 16th century, time wasn't just ruling the world, it was dissecting it. The same precision that once told people when to pray or work began to define the human body itself. The medieval belief that life belonged to God was still preached in churches, but increasingly, men with knives and ink believed otherwise. They wanted to know how long a heart could beat, how far lungs could stretch, how quickly a wound could kill. The age of rhythm had become the age of measurement. In monasteries, physicians had once been healers of both flesh and soul. Their medicine was a mixture of prayer, herbs, and hope. But now, under the ticking gaze of clocks and the careful eyes of scholars, healing became observation. Monks once prayed for balance in the humors. Now they recorded pulses, timed fevers, and counted breaths. The idea was simple and quietly revolutionary. If you could measure suffering, you could manage it. For a world that had once found meaning in mystery, this was heresy disguised as progress. The body had been sacred ground. Now it was a machine. In cities, this obsession deepened. Physicians built entire philosophies around pulse and rhythm. They held a patient's wrist and watched sand run through a glass timer, counting beats as if the soul itself could be quantified. Each pulse became a data point in the anatomy of time. Life, they began to realize, had duration. Death had a schedule. You wouldn't last long in this world either. The doctors knew little, but they measured everything. They treated plague with bleeding, fever with vinegar, madness with silence. They cut away at mystery with knives, confident that precision could replace faith. Some of them were monks turned scientists, their habits traded for smocks, their chants for calculations. They didn't see it as betrayal, they saw it as refinement. They were still serving God, just through the clockwork of his creation. In the marketplace, merchants were already applying the same logic to trade. Time dictated not only when goods were sold, but how they were priced. Work, once holy, became arithmetic. The hours of a laborer had measurable worth. The faster he worked, the more valuable he was. And for the first time, a human life could be reduced to numbers. The peasants didn't have language for this change, but they felt it. Their bodies knew. The fatigue grew sharper, the hours longer. The bell that once marked prayer now marked shifts. The field no longer belonged to the rhythm of the seasons. It belonged to the ledger. Inside the cities, the wealthy began to play their own version of the game. Time became fashion. Wristwatches, clumsy and expensive, appeared among nobles. They didn't tell time for necessity. They told it for pride. Owning precision was the new luxury. It was a way to prove superiority over the world's chaos. The irony was that the more people measured, the less they understood what they were measuring. The monks had known this instinctively. They'd used rhythm to connect with eternity, not to control it. But their successors, the merchants, the doctors, the scholars, used it to command. Time had gone from a gift to a weapon. Even the church began to adopt the language of clocks. Sermons spoke of divine order as perfect timing. Heaven was described as everlasting light. No more shadows, no more unpredictable hours. God, it seemed, was a watchmaker now. Meanwhile, in the streets, ordinary people were dying faster than they could adapt. Wars, disease, and famine still swept through the land, reminding everyone that control was an illusion. But even death was now being measured. Priests recorded not just who died, but when, how long they'd lingered, how quickly the sickness spread. Cemeteries became archives. It's strange, isn't it? The same civilization that once feared the unknown was now cataloging it. The horror of the dark had been replaced by the horror of knowing too much. And yet, this obsession created beauty. Artists painted not just saints but anatomy. They studied bones and muscles as if the human form were scripture. Architects designed churches whose dimensions echoed mathematical perfection, ratios, angles, symmetry. Cathedrals once built for mystery now became monuments to geometry. Even devotion had become measurable. In the countryside, peasants still prayed for the sun, but in the cities, thinkers began to ask how it moved. The monks' quiet discipline had evolved into curiosity, and curiosity was a dangerous kind of freedom. You can almost imagine a single monk somewhere, old now, his fingers still ink-stained, watching the world change beyond his walls. He hears the bells ringing, just as they always have, but he understands something the rest of the world doesn't. The bells no longer call men to prayer. They call them to progress, to calculation, to ambition. He knows what that means. Progress is hunger that never ends. The world has learned to count everything except what matters. By night, the towns still glow with candlelight, but even those candles burn differently now, marked, timed, rationed. The flame no longer represents faith. It represents duration. People watch how long it lasts, not how bright it burns. That's what time has done. It has taught humanity to trade wonder for control, belief for measurement, awe for accuracy. The monks once believed that to measure time was to honor creation. Their descendants believed that to master time was to escape it. Neither was right. The bell still rings in the distance. The clock still ticks. The candle still burns. But the meaning, the silence between the sounds, that's gone. And without that silence, time isn't sacred anymore. It's just passing. It's just another thing to survive. By the time the modern world arrived, no one remembered the silence. The bells still rang, of course, they always did, but no one listened anymore. They had been replaced by clocks, watches, alarms, schedules. What had once been the rhythm of faith had become the rhythm of industry. The monks' careful devotion had survived, but only as machinery. If you had lived in a medieval monastery and then somehow stepped into a modern city, the first thing you'd notice is the noise. 1,000 ticking hearts. The world no longer needed bells to tell it what to do. Every wall, every wrist, every device did the job now. Time wasn't just heard. It was everywhere, whispering in every sound, flashing in every glance at a clock face. The irony is almost too perfect. The monks built a world of order so that humans could find peace. But order became control, and peace became productivity. Time, once sacred, now belonged to everyone and to no one. Factories replaced cloisters. Workers replaced monks. Bells became whistles. Candles became lamps. The day was no longer divided by prayer but by shift. The same structure remained, but stripped of purpose. The human need for rhythm had survived, but without faith it was hollow. And yet, something of that old world still lingers. In the middle of a city, any city, you can still find towers that were once church steeples. The bells still hang there, sometimes forgotten, sometimes automated, ringing not for prayer but for nostalgia. The sound doesn't command anyone anymore, but it still carries a weight the digital clocks never could. If you listen closely, the echo is there, a memory of the time when time itself was fragile, when hours were marked by wax and flame instead of electricity. The medieval world might seem brutal and backward, but it understood something we've lost, that time is not a possession. It's a presence. The monks lived it, not measured it. They didn't rush through the day to reach its end. They moved through it as a conversation between body and soul. Their candles weren't countdowns. They were prayers made visible. Each drop of wax was a word. Each flicker of light a heartbeat in the language of devotion. When we look back at them, we often laugh. We call them primitive for measuring time with candles and bells instead of machines. But in their simplicity, they managed to understand something essential, that the point of time was not to manage it, but to feel it. Imagine that old monastery again, the one where this story began. The walls are cold. The air smells of stone and incense. The monks rise before dawn, as they always have. The bell rings through the darkness, soft, patient, sure. No one checks a clock. No one counts the seconds. They know the rhythm in their bones. They move together, lighting candles one by one until the chapel glows gold and warm. Outside, frost laces the grass. Inside, voices rise and chant. Low, steady, timeless. Each note merges with the next until it feels less like song and more like breath. The air itself becomes prayer. For a moment, the entire world is perfectly synchronized. Not by machines, not by ambition, but by intention. This was what the monks believed time was for. To connect, to steady, to remind. You would struggle in that world, no doubt. You'd miss the noise, the comfort, the distraction. The endless ticking of the modern world has trained you to fear stillness. But if you stayed long enough, if you let the silence settle into you, you might begin to feel what they felt. The rhythm beneath everything. The slow, patient heartbeat of existence itself. That's what the monks found when they burned candles to tell time. Not just measurement, but meaning. The flame told them how long an hour lasted, yes, but it also reminded them what that hour was. A fragment of eternity, spent and gone, impossible to reclaim. Today, we have all the precision in the world. We can measure milliseconds. We can track our sleep, our work, our steps, our breaths. We can capture time, dissect it, store it. But in the process, we've lost the quiet awe of simply watching it pass. The monks didn't have that problem. To them, time was not a tool but a teacher. It was how God spoke. Slowly, rhythmically, mercifully. Every flame that burned away was a lesson. Nothing lasts, but everything matters. Every bell that rang was a reminder. The world moves in circles, not lines. Every breath they took was proof that time was not an enemy to race against, but a companion to walk beside. When the last candle of the night guttered out, they didn't panic or reach for another. They let darkness return. They trusted that dawn would come again, as it always did. And when it did, they began again. We could learn from them, perhaps, to stop fighting the clock and start listening to it. To hear in its rhythm not urgency, but grace. To find stillness in the repetition, the same way they did when the bell called them to prayer in the middle of the night. Maybe that's the point of remembering them, not because they lived better or holier lives, but because they lived slower ones. They measured their days in candles. We measure ours in notifications. They feared wasting time. We fear having to sit in it. And yet, for all our progress, we still can't control it any more than they could. Time slips away just as easily, just as quietly, just as completely. The difference is they bowed their heads when it passed. We just look at our clocks. So maybe it's worth lighting a candle, not to see, not to count, but to remember. To watch the flame tremble, to feel the air move, to understand, even for a moment, what the monks once knew. Time isn't ours to keep. It's only ours to notice. And in the noticing, in that single, flickering instant between one bell and the next, we might find what they did. A kind of peace, a kind of eternity. The bell rings, the candle burns, the world turns, and that, in the end, is all the time there ever was.